34, be advised. Mary 2027 is code 6 with the suspect and the victim.
The officer responded to the call at the 9700 row of houses on the far end of Deal, near where the sand merges into Asbury, a 4:35, which wasn't atypical for late September, especially with the weather staying warm as it had been. The old man was leaning against the back of a car. His unsteadiness betrayed a line the officer first clocked as intoxication. "You're not arrested," he said, "just detained." He flipped open a pocket notebook and took a pen from the spiral. The man muttered something. The officer wrote it down. "What are you doing here, Bobby?" "Oh, it's almost that time again." He looked old and indistinguishable in the way men do near the end of their life, when once distinctive features start to melt into a jolly hole. The hoodie straps pulled tight around his neckline didn't help. "What time is that, sir?" "Time to sit at the table. Renew the deal. Contract terms." "I don't know about all that, but I do know why I'm here. Someone called us," said a man was wandering down the alley between the houses to make him feel safe, as I'm sure you can imagine. The old man mumbled something. "What's that?" "Didn't mean to frighten." "Can you tell me what you're doing here?" "Like I said, came out here for the deal. We had a show earlier, slick crowd, but afterward I came out here for the deal." "You mean you came out here to deal?" The old man grinned. His teeth were well weathered. "I catch the irony," he said. "Never count on him not to joke around." "Can you tell me about this deal?" The old man lit a cigarette and puffed. His fingernails were long and yellow. The fingers themselves appeared calloused but delicate. "I remember the first time like a dream I had this morning. He was crimson. He isn't always. He told me his name, but I didn't believe him, so he took me to the surface all the way up. It was a long ladder, longer than you can imagine, long as only God can imagine. He showed me what lies after, what lies above, but the divider was so cold that it hadn't even started to thaw." The old man exhaled a long mist of white. "He took me back, and that's when it went down." The officer felt a test on his patience, but he practiced the breath reliance from training and got ahead of it. "Okay, but my concern now is identifying you. Can I have your ID?" "Don't have it." "Where is it?" "On the bus." "Can you get someone to bring it here? Like I said, you're not arrested, but I can't let you leave until I verify who you are." The old man nodded. "Let me call Al. He'll bring it." He took out a fancy electronic phone, punched a few buttons, and spoke. He nodded, said something else, and hung up. "Al's coming by. Should be here in 10. But 15 minutes later, Al still hadn't arrived. The officer came out of his car, where he'd run the man's information, and asked if there was any update on the ID. The old man fidgeted, shrugged. "Be here soon," he said. "That's all I know." "Can you call him again?" Tried, didn't answer. The officer pinched the bridge of his nose. This was going to be a pain to ride up. "I'm sorry. Can you tell me again why you're here? What was it?" The old man tapped a packet of cigarettes, looked like unfiltered Winstons. He pulled one out and lit it. "Not to make a deal, to underline it. Third time. Tablet number 3, as they say." "I don't understand." "People think it's one meeting, and it is the first time, but one of the first things he tells you." "Who is he?" "Mr. D, you know, the chief commander, lay of the land type lord. He tells you at the first one what they call the crossroads. He lays it out. 3 meetings, spread a bunch of years apart for the purpose of a check and call. Like any good partnership. And this is a good partnership, even where it's bad." 3 meetings? 3 meetings. The smoke rose around the old man's face. The first was just past Hoboken. Like I said, a ladder to the frozen top. And when I came down, I could see things in that way, that to ride 'em means you'd feel 'em, you know. Well, you know even if you don't know. "Where was the second meeting? Weehawken?" The man didn't smile. "No, not Weehawken. Not America even. It was in Rome. 1978. I must have been, 37, Mr. D. He showed me the sigils on the canvas and took me to the place of the skull at the moment it went down. I know this sounds strange to hear, but I saw it. I saw it with my own eyes. Golgotha, the second of great pause. I saw them carry him around. He pulled out a necklace from within his hoodie. Light from the overhead glinted on it. A small silver cross. He showed me his pain, and I saw it and felt it and wrote it, and when I came back, they called it a period. I don't know anything about that. I saw a god killed and a son altered, or is it altered? The old man smiled, with an A. And what about the third meeting? That's why I'm here. It was supposed to be tonight, right around these parts. But your friend, Mr. D? He what? Never showed? Apparently not, the old man said, and I gotta say I'm surprised as you. There was a noise from the direction of the house. Both men turned. A bald man in a robe and slippers approached. You guys are still here. Is everything okay? Who are you? The officer asked. I live there. I made the call. What's going on? Hold on a moment, the officer told the old man. Stay here. To the homeowner, he said, Can you come with me? I want to ask a few questions. Get your info. The two walked a little down the road, keeping their eyes on the old man who was still leaning against the parked car. The officer explained the situation. The homeowner listened, nodded, shook his head, and retreated into his house. The old man was speaking into his phone when the officer returned. Perfect. There was a silence broken only by static from the officer's radio. The old man lit another cigarette. You probably don't believe a word I'm saying, and that's okay. It's a relief to think I'm wrong. If I'm wrong about tonight, he sipped on his smoke and stared off at the distance. Except I'm not. I know I'm not. I've had dreams, man. Ever since that first meeting, I've had enough dreams to convince me. The officer didn't say anything, didn't take the bait. He bet it wouldn't matter, and he was right. Did you ever have a dream that you couldn't explain? The officer shrugged. He pulled his notepad back out, more to have something to do than for utility. Some are more like visions. They're awful, all of them. Destruction, blindness, death, that sort of thing. They've slowed now, and I know better how to dull them, but they still come. Just about one every other month. Slow murder of the master. The officer clicked his pen cap on and off, on and off. Sounds more like nightmares. They are. Tell me about them. The man's gaze was shrewd enough to shave off a decade. You want to hear this shit? The officer nodded. For the first time, he noticed just how blue the man's eyes were, electric blue and bright in a way that seemed confined to occurrences in nature, most commonly the buildup and discharge of electrical energy in the atmosphere. Okay. Sometimes I'm on a stage, feet stuck to the wood. The audience is all skeletons. The sockets of their eyes watch me like hawks of the valley. My fingers bleed, my voice breaks. My heart gives out, my God crumbles. It doesn't matter. I keep playing, I got to. The dead is so long. He lit another cigarette. There's one where everyone I've known faces me in the same room. They're all dressed like me. They all act like me. They talk like me. Hell, they fuck like me. And then their words turn into, what do you call them, sheaths? And they pull out these knives and throw them at the tree. Suddenly I'm the tree, and the knives hurt, I gotta tell you. Well, I'm running. Just running. I'm wearing good sneakers and trendy clothes, and I'm in good shape and all that, but it's a nightmare. I fucking hate running, man. My version of hell. Then there's the apocalypse shit. Torrents of the Book of Revelations. That's awful for the same reason God is. It's the same, oh hey, is it him? Looks like Al. The officer turned. A beam of headlights cut across the road. The car was pulling up, red and low and expensive, looking enough to concretize this experience. The officer waved it over and approached. The driver wore sunglasses and smiled in a way that betrayed great affluence and even greater boredom. The officer asked him to roll down the window all the way. He decided for the time being to let the tints go. Are you Al? Who's Al? I'm Jerry. The officer looked up from his notepad. Are you here to help with the guy? Bobby? Yeah, I'm here to bail him out. Said he needed his ID. The driver held up a passport. The officer took it to his car. He went through it, confirmed it, called it in to dispatch, and felt greatly relieved. Not only was it now official and also cool as hell and a story to tell at dinner parties for years to come, but it significantly lightened his workload. He got out of his car, returned the passport to the driver, and waved the old man over. The old man shuffled near. When he reached the driver's side, he smiled. "Hi, Al." "I'm not Al. I'm Jerry." "Right? Jerry? Hi, Jerry. Good to see you." The old man's smile was genuine. Celebrities are known eccentrics, as the officer would later recount at this part in his telling of the story. That was his only explanation. It seemed as if the two men had never met and yet were old friends. The officer asked for an autograph and a handshake. The old man obliged, not taking his eyes off the driver once. The officer was surprised at the famous singer's limp noodle grip. The old man walked around the vehicle and got into the passenger seat. In silence, the two watched the officer enter his own car, turn his lights off, beep lightly in parting, and peel away. The driver smiled. He no longer appeared as human. "It's nice to see you, dear. It was never about horns or hooves. H and H, or 8 and 8. It was and it is and it was and it wasn't." "You too, buddy." "It's nice to see you, dear, but if you don't mind..." "What? Sorry." The old man tucked his necklace under his hoodie. "Thank you. It's nice to see you, dear. It's been so long. You've added years, friend." "You haven't. You look mellow like wine." "Must be nice, Johann." And then a sound near incomprehensible. Hoofy laughter. "You've added years, but you're still you." The driver put the car in drive, and then they were moving. The two chatted like old friends off into the unseasonably warm Jersey night, only it was no longer night, and it was no longer Jersey. There were rungs now, the two of them, rungs on a ladder, rising and rising, up to the place above the waters that separate this from that. And the old man, the poet, Faustian clown, designee of a delivered deal, wore his ascent, his revelation as rung, as well as both times before. The two rung upward the ladder until they were the ladder, and the ladder was everything, climbing up to forever itself, a part of everything. A ladder to thee. I would like to make something very clear here. I usually never get scared. When I say never, I truly mean never. I'm a huge fan of horror, but I never felt fear from anything in my life. Mild discomfort at most, but even that's rare. That is until what I experienced 5 minutes ago. It's 5:15 a.m. and I never felt such fear before. For context, I live with my grandma. She just turned 82 last week, and I took time off work to visit and spend time with her in Virginia. I'm 25 and work as a financial analyst in New York. She's raised me all my life, and we're extremely close. Genuinely the sweetest woman I know. However, the incident I just experienced makes me uncomfortable. Yesterday, we were watching TV in the living room, and she was getting a little tired. My grandma is an early bird, so she usually goes to bed at 8:30 to 9 p.m. every night. Tonight was no different. As she got up from the chair she's had since I could remember, she hugged me goodnight and headed upstairs to her bedroom. I'm a night owl and usually don't go to bed until 4:30 to 5 a.m. so I chose to stay up a bit longer. A few hours passed and I was still watching TV. However, I started hearing a faint banging sound from afar. I couldn't wrap my finger around it, but I ignored it at first. My grandma lives in the middle of the forest in a cabin, so I assumed it was an animal outside scraping for food or something. 5 minutes later and the banging got a bit louder. The weird thing is that the bangs were consistent, if that makes any sense. I'd see where it was coming from, but it certainly came from outside the house. I started getting a bit concerned when it wasn't stopping, so I went upstairs to check on Grandma. Thankfully, she was fast asleep and all the windows were locked. By the time I made it to her bedroom, the banging had stopped, so I let it be and walked back down. It was 2 a.m. by this point, and I figured it was time to at least try to go to sleep since I have insomnia. So I got ready and headed to the guest bedroom, which is where I slept. What felt like a few hours passed and the banging came back. I hadn't fallen asleep yet, so I could vividly hear the moment it returned. However, this time, it was a little stranger. Not only was it much, much louder, but also it wasn't just a banging sound. I could also hear screaming coming behind it, a what seemed to be blood-curdling scream of a person yelling for help. The longer I waited, the louder it got. Eventually, I got pissed off and got out of bed. With my phone flashlight at hand, I followed where the bangs and screaming were coming from. But suddenly, just as I had made it to the living room, it had stopped. "TJ, are you okay?" I heard. I turned around and saw my grandma standing on the other side of the hallway. "Yeah, just that I heard a lot of banging and screaming from outside," I replied. "Banging and screaming?" Grandma seemed confused. "Yeah, but maybe it was just an animal or something," I said while dimming the phone flashlight. Although I didn't believe for a second that it was just an animal, I didn't want to make my grandma worried or cause any problems for the night. Besides, it had already stopped, so I hoped that it wouldn't come back. Grandma sighed. "Things like that happen around here sometimes. You should get some sleep, sweetie. It's late and we have plans tomorrow." I smiled. "Yes, Grandma, I will. Love you." I hugged her and went back to my room, where I eventually dozed off. I could hear my grandma turning on the TV and cooking herself breakfast as usual. The next day passed by in a flash and nighttime came by again. I hadn't thought of what happened the night before and just saw it as a normal day. That is, until I realized that it was 1 a.m. and my grandma was still wide awake. Not just that, but also a lot more talkative than usual, too. This wouldn't have caught me off guard if it weren't for the fact that she never stayed up past 9 p.m. for the last 20 years. "Hey, Grandma," I asked. "Shouldn't you go to bed? It's late for you." "Oh, sweetie, but I'm not tired," she said. "I'll go in a bit, don't worry." It was starting to get late, even for my standards. "You should go to bed soon. It's getting late." "I'll go now. Good night," I said. As I laid down on my bed, I closed my eyes. After what felt like 15 minutes, I heard that faint sound again. Banging. As it got louder, the blood-curdling scream followed. "What the fuck?" I muttered under my breath as I swiftly pushed the duvet off me. Grabbing my flashlight, I went back to investigate, this time with the intention of figuring out what it was. As I slowly opened the door, I tiptoed around the house, following the sound. It seemed like my grandma was back upstairs sleeping, so I tried to be as quiet as possible, even though banging and screaming wasn't helping. Although I didn't feel scared of what was happening, like I said, I don't get scared easily, I was getting a bit uncomfortable as the sound worsened the closer I got to it. "What the fuck?" I muttered again. As I walked closer, the banging and screaming got progressively louder. Suddenly, I paused. There was no mistaking it. The banging and screaming was coming from the other side of the storage room door, the room my grandma keeps her stuff in. As I reached out to it, I felt a cold presence send shivers down my spine. I gasped and staggered backwards. As I quickly turned around, I saw my grandma standing at the other side of the hallway, but this time she looked different. Her back completely straight. Her skin was pale. Her soulless, lifeless stare piercing through me. It was the first time I had seen a human without a single sign of a catchlight shining her eyes. It was a tense and deadly but lifeless expression, one I can't describe in words. However, it was the first time I felt danger looking at the lady who had raised me for 25 years. Her face was glowing from the moonlight outside, although the rest of her body was surrounded by darkness. From afar, it looked like a floating head. Suddenly, her eyes widened, and there followed a smile. However, not a single wrinkle formed around her eyes. It was ominous. Nothing could convince me that the person standing in front of me was my grandmother. It barely felt human. "TJ," she said, her voice toned flat. "What are you doing?" I began shaking. By this point, the screaming had stopped. It was silent. I began stuttering and stayed quiet. No word escaped from my lips. For the first time in my life, I felt genuine fear. "TJ," repeated my grandma, her voice toned still flat. My body tensed up as I looked at her. I could barely breathe. "What are you doing?" said my grandma, slower than before. I took a deep breath. hoping that any ounce of my body could relax enough so I could form a sentence. "I'm sorry, Grandma," I said, my voice cracking. "I was curious on what the screaming was." Grandma's smile dropped instantly, and her eyes widened further. "What scream?" My body tensed again. It felt like I was getting stares from all angles. I suddenly felt something cold touch my bare feet. As I looked down, I saw what looked like blood leaking from the storage room door, reaching to my feet. "Thomas Jr.," said my grandma, raising her voice slightly. I gulped and looked back up. "Yes." "What scream?" she repeated, her voice deepening slightly. Only one sentence could come out of me at that moment. "Maybe it was just a dream. I'm sorry, Grandma." Her eyes widened further, although her stare only became more tense. "Go to sleep now," she said, enunciating every word. She sounded deeper than before, almost inhumane. "Yes, Grandma," I said, my body tensing up further. As I walked towards her, a sense of pressure dawned over me. Walking past her, I could feel her stare stabbing my head. Walking to my room, I closed the door and hid under the covers. Checking my foot, my suspicions were correct. What I felt leaking from under the storage room door wasn't just water. It was cold blood. This event leads to me writing this down. I tell you what to do. My grandma's stare, if she even was my grandma at that moment, is implanted into my brain. I feel a cold presence looming over me. I'm still shaking, hoping that the morning comes ASAP and I can forget about this. What should I do? Please, I need all the help I can get. I don't know what to do.